So, Nate, I keep hearing this morning that this is a market that wants to rally, but a lot of uncertainty. What are the charts telling you?
Yeah, well, Sam, good morning. I would say over the last, since last Monday, we set in a low on the S&P 500 at 63.34. We rallied about 4%. This was in the face of higher oil prices. We've been closing near the highs of the day. So yes, in that regard, and I think a lot of it has to do with upward revisions of EPS growth forecasts, the backdrop of the AI secular growth story. It was nice to see, Friday's jobs numbers come in firm. We saw retail sales look pretty good as well. So the economic data, the upward revision in EPS growth, that's why the market kind of wants to move higher. It wants to treat this situation like the tariff situation, but they're not that similar. Yes, Trump and his negotiating tactics, we know he has a history of we're going to, use the threat and we're going to carry the stick and we're going to see if we can get things done quickly in doing so. So I know you've been talking with your guests, what happens in terms of the taco trade or not, and, do we go through with this? If Trump does do a push on the, extends the deadline again, I'm just, the thoughts that come to me is, okay, well, if you're going to continue to extend the deadlines, then like the force of establishing a deadline might weaken over time because, the Iranian regime or whoever is over there that's responding to this may just feel like, okay, it's going to get pushed out again. And so it doesn't have that same urgency to it. So it comes down to oil prices because we know, is it going to get to the consumer eventually? Even the top half of the consumer, the top of the K, does that eventually begin to get impacted? And so we're just trying to really sort through this sliding window of potential forecast in terms of economic growth, oil prices, et cetera. But on the charts, yesterday, Sam, we got up to basically 0.5% within the 200-day simple moving average of the S&P 500. If we pull back from that, technically that's not good. That's kind of a bearish confirmation. Of course, if we were to perhaps oil prices come down, we get, some kind of, something positive in terms of a resolution overnight, and then we get above the 200-day simple moving average, that's likely going to bring in money off the sidelines from a technical standpoint.
Okay, interesting. So, it really comes down to what we hear tonight. And as I mentioned to George, it seems to be binary risk right now. And as you say, It could be a bit more nuanced in that they could actually even potentially kick the can down the road. So markets would have to then grapple with that. And I think it speaks to some of the views out there. I mean, Mohammed Alarian, for instance, saying the market is really torn right now between the threats of the escalation and hope for a circuit breaker, which maybe speaks to the price action we're seeing right now. So money coming off the sidelines. I mean, from what you're seeing on the charts, I mean, we know that there are areas that are looking pretty oversold at this point. I mean, we're seeing a big pullback in technology stocks across the board right now, particularly our Mag 7 cohort memory as well. What would you suggest is where that money would be deployed? I mean, where does it go right now?
Well, if you go to the charts and I look at the sectors, I mean, we know energy has been doing really well in terms of a sector. I think number 2 on there is utilities. I think it's maybe one of the only sectors out there that's above its 50-day simple moving average. A lot of that is speaking to give me stability of cash flow, AI infrastructure, because where's that relative safety? I think it's understood within the guesstimate of where we are and what inning on the AI infrastructure build out. It's still early innings, maybe mid innings. It's really tough to say, but still, that's where the relative safety is. That's where the money is going. However, a lot of the valuation within, whether it's GE Vernova or Vertiv, et cetera, a lot of those types of names, or even the utilities, there's nothing that's going to prevent some kind of a reset if we start increasing the odds, if the needles move up on the recession meter, so to speak. Because, Sam, I think we all know that if we eventually do go into some kind of a recession, and I'm not saying that, we're a long way from that, but we know that that multiple is going to be closer to 15 rather than 20. And so that's, again, that push and pull that's going on with the market. But right now, it does look like they're going back to stability of cash flow, A lot of that is in with mega cap tech. It's within the AI infrastructure plays. We saw the rebounds from the memory stocks that happened over the past 4 days, a strong bounce from an oversold level there on Micron, SanDisk, et cetera. And so that looks like where the money wants to go. But in the meantime, at what point do we start to pull out a recessionary playbook and really go to the defensives? We're not there yet. There's still hope and belief that this AI secular growth story is going to help pull us through some of these economic headwinds that potentially may manifest.
Okay.
Broadcom shares jumped today as the company confirms a deal to develop and supply Google's in-house chips for the next 5 years. What's the long-term impact for Alphabet? Our Mackenzie Sagalos is looking into that in today's Tech Check. Good morning, Mac.
Hey, Carl. So Broadcom shares getting a much bigger bounce than Alphabet this morning. But longer term, Google may be the real winner from this chip deal. For years, TPUs were Google's internal secret weapon, these custom-built chips designed to handle its own workloads like training, search, and running Gemini. They've been available publicly through Google Cloud since 2018, and now we're in the phase where customers like Anthropic, Meta, and other major AI players are leaning into the Google stack, with some reportedly leasing and others buying Google's TPUs directly as they look for cheaper alternatives to Nvidia's GPUs. And that demand is only accelerating. Anthropic's computing capacity from Google's chips alone is set to more than triple by next year. Now, TPUs are designed to speed up AI workloads. They're not as flexible as Nvidia's chips, but they are less expensive and more efficient for the jobs they were built to do. And increasingly, they're shifting from an internal efficiency tool to a core pillar of Alphabet's AI revenue strategy. D.A. Davidson estimates that Google's chip business could capture 20% of the AI market over the next few years, making it a roughly $900 billion opportunity, potentially worth more than Google Cloud itself. And it really underscores Google's edge in AI vertical integration. Unlike its big tech peers, it has the chips, the cloud platform, the Gemini models, and the consumer products all under one roof. And Google still trades at a discount to Apple and Amazon. So you've got a company with what analysts are calling a credible new revenue driver and a market that hasn't fully priced it in yet. Guys?
Got to say, Mac, you remember last summer where it was all about existential risk for search? It's got to be one of the most profound education processes for the market in the last year, this rethink about Alphabet.
Oh, certainly. And part of what's so interesting about the uptick in interest in the TPU is that it directly coincided with this comeback for Gemini, where originally they were on the back foot compared to ChatGPT, and then it started to outperform those models in a lot of the benchmarking tests. And suddenly we started to see this uptick in appetite. And through the purchase orders that Broadcom has put out in relation to Anthropic's purchases of TPUs, we know that they're able to undercut Nvidia on price. And then we're seeing efficacy in terms of their use case with Gemini, both training their models and running them, the inference use case.
Yeah, as Nvidia tries to get out of the 170s, really interesting market. You do have the IEA saying that this crisis is worse than 73, 79, and 22 put together. How do you think it's different?
Well, I think it's different from a economic angle, which is that we have discussed it in terms of the oil supply being taken out, all the geopolitical ramifications. But what I argue in my latest op-ed in the FT is that never before has the world entered any sort of a crisis with such high debt and deficit levels. That if you look at the average budget deficit of developed countries around the world, it's close to 4% of GDP. America is, of course, the highest at close to 6%, and that could get up to 7% of GDP this year. And of course, we have average debt to GDP levels, just government debt, of like 100% or more in America and other developed countries. So this is very different. And this has a major implication, which is that unlike in the past, I think that this time governments are going to be quite severely constrained to cushion the economic impact of this oil shock the longer it lasts.
You're right to point out deficit percentages. Yesterday, I think it was PIMCO that did say 7% for 26. And once you started counting in certain ways for, say, student loan provisions, maybe 7.4. That's not the number, certainly, that Secretary Bessent was hoping for.
Yeah, and I think that's why the bond market's reaction this time has been quite different. But if you look at the past few crises, bond yields would typically fall. You'd get a safe haven bid for bonds. But this time, bond yields have risen. And this is not because of inflation expectations going up like in some past oil crises, that long-term inflation expectations remain relatively anchored. This time it's the term premia which has gone up. And the only way we can explain that, given that this oil shock is a hit to growth, is the fact that there are mounting concerns about the debt and deficit. So this time the bond market's reaction has been different than past few crises. And also we seem to be hitting some red lines on the debt and deficit dynamics. I mean, as many people will say, that these fears about the debt and deficits have been around for decades. But what's different this time, apart from the bond market reaction, is that some of the metrics are flashing red. I mean, the fact that the interest expense now on our debt, the amount we spend on that in America is more than our entire defense budget, is something which has been problematic for big powers in the past. So I think that this is something we need to keep an eye on, which is that never before have we entered a economic crisis with such high debt and deficit levels, and that's going to limit the ability of governments to cushion the economic impact. And the longer this lasts, the more problematic that becomes.
Iran is on the clock to make a deal with the United States or possibly face obliteration of key infrastructure sites. President Trump today turning up the pressure on Iran while also remaining open to diplomacy. That's his tactic. It works. His deadline just hours away now, 8 p.m. Eastern. The president wrote a post this morning. Maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. President Trump said this last night.
8 o'clock Eastern time, and after that, they're going to have no bridges, they're going to have no power plants. Stone Ages, yeah, Stone Ages. We have a plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again. I mean, complete demolition by 12 o'clock. And it'll happen over a period of 4 hours if we wanted to. We don't want that to happen.
Brand new video now from Central Command shows our U.S. military firepower at work. As part of Operation Epic Fury, U.S. forces continuing to destroy terrorist targets inside Iran. So far, they have taken out, and this is a huge number, 13,000 targets and damaged or destroyed more than 155 vessels. Fox News can confirm the U.S. bombed dozens of sites on Karg Island overnight. And the focus was on the bunkers there, radar stations, and ammunition storage areas. International military strategist Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb is coming up next in Focus, though let's talk to our chief foreign correspondent, Trey Yingst, on the ground. We'll get a report from him, and we always can press in with at least one good question for Trey. Let's watch. Trey.
Yeah, Harris, good morning. We're just 9 hours away from President Trump's deadline for Iran to make a deal, or the president says he will target Iran's energy infrastructure, bridges, and power plants. Overnight, the United States launched dozens of airstrikes against Iran's Karg Island, a critical piece of oil infrastructure. We understand, according to Fox's Jennifer Griffin, the targets included bunkers, radar stations, and ammunition storage. Landing docks were intentionally not targeted, according to senior U.S. officials. Now, the IRGC has warned it will target U.S. oil interests in the region and that it will make U.S. and its allies deprived of gas in the Middle East for years. The president speaking yesterday from the White House saying this about the situation.
Do I want to destroy their infrastructure? No. It will take them 100 years to rebuild. Right now, if we left today, it would take them 20 years to rebuild their country, and it would never be as good as it was. And the only way they're going to be able to rebuild their country is to utilize the genius of the United States of America.
Those negotiations going on as we speak, Harris, and the president told me over the weekend that Iran isn't even negotiating on their nuclear program anymore. The president said the big thing is they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. They're not even negotiating that point. It's so easy, the president added. That's already been conceded. Most of the points are conceded. Now, with talk of diplomacy across the region, we're also learning more about that daring rescue that happened over the weekend to save a stranded airman in Iranian territory. High-level U.S. sources told Fox News that while the airman rescue was going on, the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, directed a strike on an IRGC headquarters in an underground facility near the Iranian capital of Tehran. B-2 bombers from the United States used bunker buster penetrating bombs, the same weapons used in Operation Midnight Hammer. The source talked to Fox News, saying the headquarters was obliterated. All of this is happening as the Israelis are continuing their strikes against the Iranian regime. A senior Israeli official telling Fox News today they launched a series of strikes against rail infrastructure inside of Iran after warning civilians there to avoid train travel. Harris?
And that gets me to just a quick follow-up question. So the Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we are crushing the terrorist regime in Iran, but we are doing so with even greater vigor and with increasing force. And he talked about hitting the train tracks and bridges used by the IRGC. Just talk to me real quickly about this ramp up now that he mentioned.
Yeah, Harris, right now we are seeing a complete disconnect in the capabilities of the United States and Israel versus Iran. Each and every day, the United States and Israel are ramping up their strikes against the Iranian regime. Yesterday, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, said it was the largest bombing campaign since Operation Epic Fury began. The campaign today is expected to be even larger. At the same time, the Iranians are continuing their attacks across the region with cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones. But each and every day, their capability is getting reduced, and that is part of the strategy of the United States. I'm told by officials here in the Middle East that the U.S. and Israel can carry on a campaign for far longer than the